CGM.
Good day, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present today at the ASPED workshop. My name is Manal AlJammal, and I take care of the medical and scientific affairs for adult diabetes care. I would again like to thank the organizers for the opportunity for us to present on Freestyle Libre at your event. So, on today's agenda, what are we going to discuss? We are going to give again an overview on Freestyle Libre Flash Glucose Monitoring. What does it consist of? How do we do a setup? And we make sure that the patient is properly using the system, what information we get when we scan the sensor, as well as the performance expected while we are using the system. So in terms of a system overview, a Freestyle Libre consists of a sensor and a reader. The sensor can stay for up to 14 days on the body. It does not require any finger stick calibration or coding. It is approved for use in all patients with diabetes aged 4 years and above, including pregnant females. Once the sensor is applied on the body, it will require a 1-hour warm-up. And as I mentioned here on the slide, the accuracy, which is the numerical accuracy, and I will talk in details later, is 9.2% MARD versus the lab for adults and 9.7% for the pediatric population. The sensor continuously reads glucose and saves them at a 15 minutes interval, and as well as it is accurate for decision making, including insulin dosing. There are no significant interferences while using the sensor, including the acetaminophen or the paracetamol, and the sensor is water resistant. The patients can continue to shower, bathe, swim, as well as do their regular sports activities, as long as they don't immerse the sensor for more than 30 minutes at a depth more than 1 meter. So patients can continue their daily lives while using the sensor. This is how the reader looks like. It has a backlit color touch screen, one button, home button to turn on and off the reader, as well as we have a USB port so that the patient can or the user can charge their reader, as well as in the future they can download to the software solutions. We also have a test strip port just in case the patient would want to do a finger stick testing while the sensor warms up, or in case they don't have access to a sensor. They can do that until their new sensor is up and running. The reader feature, it's compact, lightweight, with an easy scan. It can show me 3 pieces of information, the real time and the history, and now I will go into the details. It provides patient-friendly graphs, as well as the storage of 90 days of glucose data. As well, it can scan through clothing for a thickness of up to 4 centimeters. This is the sensor kit. It consists of an applicator and the sensor pack, and just the patient will have to combine them in an easy 2-step way, as well as we do have the product insert that coming with the sensor. Now I will walk you through how do we do the system setup, as well as the application of the sensor and the activation. So once the patient receives their first kit, they will take out the reader. They will turn on the home button. Just make sure that it's also charged. Usually it comes with charged already, but just to ensure that it is efficiently used, we would advise that the patient will charge the reader before starting, and then they will just select their preferred language on turning it on, the current date, then they will press on next. And then on the next, they will do setup for the time. The next thing would be to set up the target glucose range. Also, it will be set as per the preference for the patient, or as per discussions with the healthcare professional. They will press on next, and the next screen will be a message just identifying the trend arrows, a quick overview on what does each trend arrow mean, from rapid changes to stable glucose levels. And then they will press on done, and then the reader would be ready now to activate a new sensor. And as you can see on the home page, we have access to settings, we have access to check glucose, review history in case there is history on the reader, but of course if it's a new reader there will be no history. And then also here the countdown on how many days are remaining on the sensor life. So next step would be the application of the sensor. Now we have the backside of the upper arm as the only approved side. And why is that? Because the evaluation and the accuracy data was evaluated for the backside of the upper arm. And that's why we don't have on our label any other alternate sides. We know that some patients prefer to have it on other sides. However, we cannot advise on the accuracy and the performance because we have not done any formal evaluation on that side. So the patients will need to prepare the backside of the upper arm. They will need first to wash with water and soap and then dry it with a towel, and then they will disinfect with an alcohol wipe. Now, also important to note that particularly if this area is hairy, particularly in small children, this could be a somewhat hairy area, we would advise that to make it an easier experience, particularly when removing off the sensor, just to do a little bit of shaving to make sure it is not either impractical while applying the sensor or impractical while removing the sensor. So now we come to the part where the user will need to do an assembly. So they will take the sensor pack, they will open it like a yogurt pack on a solid surface. We ask the patient to unscrew the applicator, and then again on a solid surface they will just combine both parts. Again, they will combine automatically because when they mark, when they put an alignment on the mark, the applicator can go only in one way into the pack. And once it's fully pressed down, they will remove it, and then they will see, you see there is a needle that will help the insertion of the sensor into the under the skin. So with one step, we call it stamping. We ask the patient, now you can stamp the sensor on the backside of the upper arm. Once it's stamped, then they can feel, make sure that the sensor is secure and it's in place. Now, this sensor and the adhesive are designed to stay for up to 14 days on the body. In case the patient repeatedly complains of that the sensor is falling out, particularly in smaller age groups with their high level of activity, or sometimes even older users, while they're using the sensor, they start to hit the doors or the doorknobs or whatever, and then the sensor can get a little bit loose. In case this is a repetitive pattern, then maybe we can consider to have an over bandage just to make sure that the sensor is in place. It is not in the guidance, it's not in the label. However, just for the convenience of the patient to avoid them losing the sensor because of these accidents, just make sure that the sensor opening is exposed. So we have to make a hole in that over bandage so that the opening of the sensor is not covered, and also the over bandage should not be tight. So now when we scan the sensor, after the 1 hour warm-up period, you will just pass on the reader over the sensor, and you will get 3 pieces of information. You will get the current glucose reading. Here as an example is 112 milligrams per deciliter. We will get a trend arrow. These two information, the trend arrow and the current glucose readings, are updated every minute. And then we have the 8-hour history for the patient, and this is updated every 15 minutes. So in schematically, if I want to present how the sensor saves and transfers the data, so here, in case the patient wants to scan over 60 times per minute, they will not, if there's a change on the reading, they will not see it before the next minute. And here we see the example, the patient scanned at 1:05, so no changes will be seen before the next minute. Similarly, for the 8-hour history, we need to wait for 15 minutes before the line again is updated, because the sensor automatically saves every 15 minutes reading. So we will end up in every 8 hours, 32 readings would be saved. And that's why we ask the patient to scan an average of, they have to scan every 8 hours so that they don't lose any data. Of course, with experience, we know that patients will scan much more, but we need to make sure that they are scanning in the proper times. They are not oversleeping so that they don't miss any of the earlier hours of the night. So at least every 8 hours so that they will get the full information. An important piece of information that the patient needs to be aware about, that when they scan, they will get a trend arrow. So the trend arrow is with the algorithm is important because it gives the indication of where my glucose readings are heading within the next 15 minutes or 30 minutes, particularly when we are going into the critical levels such as hypoglycemia. So the patient, once they are scanning, they will need to take note of the trend arrow so that they are able to understand and make better decisions in terms of the level of changes in glucose. As you can see, Freestyle Libre will offer 5 configurations of the trend arrow, either going up is rising or rising rapidly, or falling or falling rapidly, as well as it will indicate when the glucose levels are changing slowly. So this is just to summarize what information are provided on each and every scan. As I mentioned, Freestyle Libre is approved for insulin dosing and treatment decisions. And since its release in 2015, we have approval for non-adjunctive use. And now the language is added to the user manual. The patient does not require to do any confirmatory finger sticks during the rapidly changing glucose levels. And they would be required to do one only when their symptoms don't match the readings they are getting on the sensor, and then they can use that report on the reader if required. Quick overview on what the reader provides as reports. So we have 7 retrospective reports on the reader, the logbook, which it saves every scan, and if the patient would like to add a note on the reader, they are able to do so within a window of 15 minutes. They will press on the pencil icon after the scan, and they will add a note, whether it's on insulin or on food. We have the daily graph, which summarizes the past 24 hours when we access that, and the patient can go from day to day on the reader. We have the average glucose over 24 hours period in blocks of 6 hours. So you can see the average of glucose levels in the 6 hours period time, the daily patterns, which is a schematic AGP, and again this will only appear after 5 days on the sensor. The other 3 reports is the time and target, and which also identifies, based on the target set on the reader, how much of time the patient is sitting in the target above and below. And then the low glucose events, which if the patient is going below 70 for more than 15 minutes, the reader will save that as a low glucose event. And then the final one is the sensor usage, which also indicates how much the patient is actually engaged in terms of scanning and how much of the sensor data is captured on the reader. So my last part would be on the performance, which is the accuracy. So the accuracy of our Freestyle Libre systems across all the board, whether it's Libre 1, 2, or 3, as well as all the accuracy for all our products, we are using the same algorithm. So it's only the difference in some technical specifications. However, the algorithm is unified across all Libre systems. The accuracy is based on a clinical trial that included both adults and pediatrics. So here I'm showing the data from the adults. So when we report the accuracy, we report 2 numbers: the numerical accuracy expressed as the MARD, or the mean absolute relative difference, and the clinical accuracy is expressed on the consensus error grid, which I will show in a minute. So the overall MARD in the adult population, that included 144 individuals, was 9.2%, and that's as compared to the lab, or the Yellow Springs instrument, which is comparing coupled or paired data points between the sensor and the lab. Also, I'm here showing the accordance between the lab and the sensor in the hypoglycemic range. Below 70, the compatibility was 98.4%, and at the lower ranges, it was 96.3%. That's for the adults. For the consensus error grid, it's a regression plot where we plot the lab coupled or paired data points from the lab versus the sensor. And then the regression plot is divided into 5 zones: A, B, C, D, and E, where A is the clinically accurate and B is the clinically acceptable. And we want the readings, the paired readings, to fall in that 2 zones. For the adult accuracy, we had around 17,000 paired data points, and 99.9% of those results fell within zones A and B. over the period of performance. Also, because we are using the proprietary sensor technology, wired enzyme technology, to ensure the stability, as well as there are no errors from any calibration or coding. And also with the new algorithm, now our performance as before is stable over the 14 days, and here we see the mark over the different periods of wearing the sensor from the beginning to early, middle, late to end. We average below 10% or a single digit mark. Similarly, for the pediatric accuracy, again, this is in the same study, we had a pediatric cohort of 129 pediatric individuals aged from 4 to 17. They wore two sensors on the right and left, and then we compared the data from the sensors versus the lab. The overall mark was 9.7%, and the accordance in the lower ranges was 98.8% for below 70, and 40 to 50 was 96.8%. We also see that this is the improvement in the performance that now allows us to not to do any confirmatory sticks in the hypoglycemia range because of the improved performance in that range. This is the consensus aggregate for the pediatric population. We have 100% of the glucose readings between the sensor and between the lab falling into zones A and B. Also, for the performance over the 14 days, we also, similar to the adult, it is stable over the 14 days of wear and averaging around 10% mark. So in summary, Freestyle Libre Flash Glucose Monitoring provides actionable insights. It's easy to use. One single scan can provide information for the patient. No finger stick calibration is required. Accuracy for adults and pediatrics is unsurpassed in terms of the performance and over the 14 days, as well as we have seen improved glycemic outcomes in clinical trial setting and real-world evidence, and maybe at a later opportunity, we can discuss this in details. So thank you very much for your attention, and in case anybody has any questions, we can open it now.
Thank you, Dr. Manal, for your informative talk. Now we questions. Dr. Manal, I want to ask you about the age of use of Freestyle Libre. You said that we can use it from 4 years. What about the children below 4 years?
Thank you very much for your question. So the approved age for the use of flash glucose monitoring, Freestyle Libre, currently is 4 years and above. And that's because we have evaluation data in that age group. We don't have data in the younger age group, but however, I will leave Dr. Fiona Campbell to comment on that because, again, as Abbott, I can't say that we have the approval, but from a clinical experience, Dr. Fiona would be the best to advise on that. Dr. Fiona.
Thank you, Manal, and it's lovely to see everyone. Thank you for the invitation. From a clinical point of view, I personally use the flash sensing system for younger patients than 4. I know that's not what the companies say, but I do. We have a cohort of very young patients with type 1 diabetes and the maturity onset diabetes of the young cohort. And I have used the sensor on tiny babies, only several days of age, to actually minimize the trauma of having to repeatedly blood test when they have unstable blood glucose values. So personally, I do use it, but I just need to stress the importance that this has never been a recommendation of the company.
Thank you, Dr. Fiona, for your excellent presentation. I would like to ask a question about the time lag between glucose measurement by the Freestyle Libre and the capillary glucose reading. What is the situation that we should compare or confirm the readings of the flash glucose monitoring of Freestyle Libre with finger prick test? Because we have not yet Freestyle Libre second generation in Egypt, and the Freestyle Libre here when first generation does not indicate hypo or hyper, or the alarm. There is no alarm.
Yeah. So, interestingly, I do have access to both generations, and my recommendations clinically do not differ. The alarms help, but the recommendations are if the young person is symptomatic of hypoglycemia, they need to check a blood test. If the sensor is reading less than 4 millimoles per litre, which we measure in our country, we test with a blood test. And if the blood glucose is greater than 14, our recommendation is to test for ketones. And therefore, a blood test and ketone test is done in the high range as well. So symptomatic, when it's reading low, when it's reading high, above 14 to coincide with ketone monitoring, and that there are clinical recommendations. But other than that, between those levels, the high and the low levels, we are depending on scanned glucose monitoring and entering that data into any meters to give guidance with insulin adjustment and insulin pumps too, because we have access to them as well.
Thank you, Dr. Fiona. Dr. Manal, I would like to ask Dr. Manal about the application or the cloud system, when will be available in Egypt, so that there can be like a network between the health professional, the mother, the child, because this will be helpful. And the second question is that I heard that a new version is coming on, like it will be like a real CGM, not only intermittently scanned or flash. So there is in the pipeline, there is a recent version coming on that gives us more hope for better metabolic control. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Shireen, for your question. So for your first, I will answer first the second question, which is the real-time CGM, which is the Freestyle Libre 3. It's not in the pipeline. Actually, it has been launched already in Germany, but it works in the same algorithm. It's just the difference in terms of now it is communicating continuously and shows the reading on the application. So that's the Freestyle Libre 3. It's already available in Germany. Now, for your first question, which is the availability of the digital health tools or the application, including Freestyle Libre Link and the caregiver app, Freestyle Libre Link app, and as well as the cloud solution, which is the Libre View. So I promise you we are working to have it launched as soon as possible in Egypt. I cannot commit again to a date because that's a commercial, on the commercial plans. However, we are working on that to have it available as soon as possible, because we realize that this is going to support the clinical practice as well as for the caregivers. It really makes a difference for this communication and the users of the sensor as well, because the reports on the application are much more interactive rather than the ones on the reader.
Thank you very much. Looking forward. Now we have some questions from the audience.
اتفضلي دكتورة غادة.
Thank you for the informative presentations. My question is for Dr. Manal. I saw a case, 6-year-old diabetic child with some sort of atrophy at the site of insertion, lipoatrophy. Do you face such complication before, and what if you face it, what is the management? The second question, can we upgrade the software of version 1 to be version 3 on the same device, or he should buy another one? These are the two questions.
Okay. So for the first question, in case there is a site reaction, if you, now I haven't heard of any lipoatrophies unless it is related to other reasons. I haven't heard reports of lipoatrophy at the site of the insertion, but in case of any reactions happening there, we would recommend that the sensor be removed, and then the patient will need to follow up with their physician who will decide when they can go back on the sensor based on the situation. But I will also ask here Dr. Fiona from her experience if she has gone through this, because personally I have not heard previously reports on that reaction.
Thank you, Manal. I haven't had that in clinical practice, and we've got extensive use of the sensors really since they were released into clinical practice. So absolutely not had lipoatrophy other than when the sensor has been applied in an area where the young person has been infusing insulin either by injection or pump. So I don't have any experience of that being a side effect of sensor use.
Thank you, Dr. Fiona. And
Dr.
for your question, sorry, because
Dr.
she was asking a question. Sorry, go ahead.
Dr. Manal, some patients use sensor for more than 14 days. What's your comment?
It cannot be used more than 14 days because it is designed to stop automatic once it finishes the 14 days. We have had some attempts at, but these were old news, at elongating the sensor life, but it didn't work out. So the sensor will automatically stop, and it is designed to live up to 14 days. It will automatically stop.
في سؤال. طب last question.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'll just ask a quick question. What about do you consider trend arrows when giving a correction bolus for hyperglycemia?
Yes,
I think this is for you, Dr. Fiona.
is it for me? We encourage the use of trend arrows both up the way and down the way. So I always say to the patients, use the number that they see on the reader and use the arrow to guide their management. So if you have a value that has double up arrows versus double down arrows, it really affects your judgment as to whether they give insulin or they don't give insulin. So the situation that the young person is in, the arrow and the reading, all three need to be considered before any intervention with treatment or with insulin.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Fiona. Thanks, Dr. Manal AlJammal, for this elegant talks.